What happens when a violent prison gang leader picks the wrong target? A frail 72-year-old man who hasn't spoken a word in 3 years. Welcome back to Tales of Wonder. If you enjoy stories that prove respect isn't earned through fear, but through character, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our next tale. Now let's begin today's story. Douglas State Correctional Facility wasn't the kind of place where mercy thrived. The concrete walls absorbed screams, the fluorescent lights hummed with indifference, and the air itself seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 regrets. It was a maximum security institution where the worst of society's offenders lived out their sentences, and where power dynamics were established not through reason, but through violence. In cell block D, an unspoken hierarchy existed. At the top sat Marcus Reaper Davidson, a mountain of a man at 6'4", covered in tattoos that told stories of street wars and criminal empires. Marcus had been inside for 8 years on charges of racketeering, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. He ran his gang, the Southside Kings, from behind bars with the same ruthless efficiency he'd employed on the streets. His word was law. His fists were judge and jury. And then there was Henry Matsuda. Henry was everything Marcus wasn't. At 72 years old, he stood barely 5'6", with silver hair cropped close to his scalp and gentle brown eyes that seemed perpetually focused on something distant, something the rest of them couldn't see. His frame was slight, almost fragile, the kind of build that made the younger inmates wonder how he'd survived even a month in general population. Henry had arrived at Douglas 3 years ago, transferred from a lower security facility after what the prison gossip mill called administrative reasons, code for nobody really knew or cared. From day one, he kept to himself. He never spoke. Not a single word. Not to guards, not to inmates, not even when provoked. He moved through the prison like a ghost, attending meals in silence, working his assigned job in the library without complaint, and spending his recreation time sitting perfectly still in the yard, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The other inmates had theories, of course. Some said he was brain damaged. Others claimed he'd taken a vow of silence for religious reasons. A few believed he was simply terrified into muteness by the harsh realities of prison life. But nobody knew for sure, and after a while, most stopped caring. Henry became part of the background, a harmless old man counting down his days. Marcus noticed him, though. It started small. A shoulder bump in the chow line that sent Henry's tray clattering to the floor. A crude comment about ancient artifacts drew laughs from Marcus's crew. Henry never reacted. He simply cleaned up the mess, got a new tray, and continued with his day as if nothing had happened. This lack of response only fueled Marcus's interest. In prison, fear was currency, and respect was extracted through domination. An old man who refused to show either was an anomaly that demanded correction. "Joe, Grandpa," Marcus called out one afternoon in the yard, his voice booming across the concrete. "You deaf or just stupid? I'm talking to you." Henry sat cross-legged on a bench near the basketball court, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the voice at all. The other inmates paused their activities, sensing the brewing confrontation. In prison, entertainment came in violent packages, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Marcus strode over, his crew flanking him like loyal attack dogs. He stood directly in front of Henry, casting a shadow over the old man's peaceful posture. "Old man, you got a hearing problem?" Marcus leaned down, his face inches from Henry's. "When I talk, people listen. That's how things work around here." Still nothing. Henry's breathing remained steady, his expression serene. It was as if Marcus didn't exist. The bully's face darkened. Being ignored was the ultimate disrespect, especially in front of his people. He reached down and flicked Henry's ear, hard. The old man's head jerked slightly to the side, but he remained seated, eyes still closed. A guard near the perimeter fence noticed the interaction, but didn't move. As long as nobody was bleeding, yard confrontations were considered conflict resolution by the staff. They'd intervene when necessary, but not before. Over the following weeks, Marcus's harassment intensified. What started as verbal mockery evolved into a calculated campaign of humiliation. He'd kick Henry's chair out from under him in the common room. He'd dump garbage on Henry's bunk during cell inspections. He'd organize his crew to form a wall, blocking Henry from accessing the library where the old man worked. Through it all, Henry remained silent, unresponsive, unmoved. The other inmates began placing bets. How long until the old man broke? How long until he either fought back or begged for mercy? The smart money said he'd snap within a month. The cynics predicted he'd request protective custody and spend the rest of his sentence in isolation. Nobody predicted what actually happened. It was a Tuesday morning during the breakfast shift. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual chaos. Metal trays clanging, hundreds of conversations overlapping, the smell of industrial eggs and burnt coffee permeating everything. Henry sat alone at his usual table near the far wall, methodically eating his oatmeal with the focus of a man performing a meditation. Marcus had been planning this moment for days. He wanted an audience, and the cafeteria provided exactly that, with his entire crew surrounding him. He approached Henry's table, carrying his own tray. Without warning, he accidentally tripped, sending his entire breakfast, eggs, oatmeal, juice, and coffee, cascading onto Henry's head and shoulders. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Even inmates who had no affiliation with Marcus found the spectacle amusing. The old man sat there completely drenched, bits of egg sliding down his face, coffee dripping from his hair. For the first time since his arrival, Henry opened his eyes. Those eyes weren't angry. They weren't afraid. They were simply aware, present, observing. "Oh man, I'm so sorry, Grandpa," Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, his tone exaggerated. "These floors are so slippery. Here, let me help you clean up." He reached down as if to offer assistance, then instead grabbed the collar of Henry's jumpsuit and yanked him to his feet. The old man's slight frame offered no resistance. Marcus pulled him close, their faces inches apart. "You gonna say something now, old man? Huh? You gonna finally use that mouth of yours?" Henry's expression didn't change. His breathing remained calm. But something flickered in his eyes, a depth that Marcus, in his arrogance, completely missed. Pathetic, Marcus spat, shoving Henry backward. The old man stumbled, but didn't fall. 3 years of silence. "You know what I think? I think you're hiding something. I think you're scared. I think, Davidson, step back. Now." The command came from Officer Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who'd been watching from the cafeteria entrance. He strode forward, hand on his baton, face set in the neutral expression all experienced guards mastered. Marcus released Henry with a theatrical sigh. "Just helping out an elderly inmate who had an unfortunate accident, sir. Community service and all that. Back to your table. Now." Marcus smirked but complied, returning to his crew amid backslaps and laughter. Officer Rodriguez turned to Henry, who stood there dripping with breakfast, his expression unchanged. "Matsuda, get yourself cleaned up. Report to medical for a uniform change." Henry nodded once, the first acknowledgement he'd given any direct order in months, and walked calmly toward the exit. As he passed Marcus's table, the bully called out one more taunt. "Sweet dreams, Grandpa. Hope you sleep well tonight." The threat was clear. In prison language, that meant Marcus was planning a more serious confrontation. Cell visits, bathroom ambushes, the kind of violence that left permanent damage. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in Cell Block D knew, was that Henry Matsuda's silence wasn't born from fear or brain damage or religious devotion. It was a choice, a disciplined, deliberate choice made 3 years ago when he'd first arrived at Douglas. That night, after lights out, Marcus and two of his most trusted crew members made their move. They'd paid off the night guard with commissary credits to take an extended bathroom break. The cell doors in Block D had a known mechanical flaw that could be exploited with a sharpened piece of plastic, a secret the veteran inmates guarded carefully. Marcus's cell door clicked open, then his crew member cells. They moved silently through the darkened corridor toward Henry's cell at the far end. The old man would be asleep, vulnerable, alone. They'd deliver a beating brutal enough to require hospitalization, but calculated enough to avoid a murder charge. Just enough to establish dominance, to prove that silence wouldn't protect him. Marcus jimmied Henry's door open with practiced ease. The three men slipped inside, closing the door behind them. In the darkness, they could make out the shape of a body on the bunk, covers pulled up, perfectly still. "Grandpa," Marcus whispered, reaching down to yank the blanket away. The bunk was empty, just pillows arranged to look like a sleeping form. Before Marcus could process this, the lights in the cell block suddenly blazed alive. An alarm began to wail, and over the PA system, Warden Thompson's voice boomed, "Davidson, Marcus. Prisoners Franklin and Rodriguez. Freeze where you are. You are surrounded." The cell door flew open. 6 guards in full riot gear flooded in, batons drawn, moving with the precision of a tactical team. Marcus and his crew were on the ground, zip-tied and subdued within 15 seconds. As Marcus's face pressed against the cold concrete floor, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing in the corridor, flanked by Warden Thompson and two men in suits, was Henry Matsuda. But the frail, silent old man was gone. In his place stood someone different, posture straight, eyes sharp, expression calm but authoritative. One of the suited men stepped forward, holding up an identification badge. Special Agent Henry Matsuda, FBI. Marcus Davidson, you've just added attempted assault of a federal agent to your list of charges, along with corrupting a corrections officer and conspiracy to commit assault. Your friends here are looking at additional 5 to 10 years. You're looking at transfer to a federal supermax facility, where I assure you, the hierarchy is very different. Marcus's mind reeled. FBI? Federal agent? The old man was. Warden Thompson knelt down so Marcus could see his face. Mr. Matsuda came to us 3 years ago as part of an undercover operation investigating corruption in the state prison system. We've been building cases against inmates and guards who think they run this place. You, Davidson, just became our star exhibit. Every assault, every bribe, every threatening word, all documented, all recorded, all admissible in federal court. Henry, Agent Matsuda, looked down at Marcus with those same calm eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. I took a vow of silence as part of my cover, Mr. Davidson. But I heard everything. I saw everything. Every corrupt guard you paid off, every inmate you extorted, every rule you broke thinking you were untouchable. 3 years of observation. 3 years of evidence. He pulled out a small recording device from his pocket, including tonight's little visit. Premeditated assault, conspiracy, breaking and entering, all on tape, all documented. He paused. You should have left me alone. The aftermath moved swiftly. Marcus Davidson was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado, a supermax facility where inmates spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. His crew received additional sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. The corrupt guard who'd taken the bribe was arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison himself. Agent Matsuda's 3-year undercover operation resulted in 47 indictments. 12 corrections officers were arrested for accepting bribes, smuggling contraband, and facilitating violence. 23 inmates faced additional federal charges. The Douglas State Correctional Facility underwent a complete administrative overhaul, with new protocols implemented to prevent the kind of corruption that had flourished under the old regime. As for Henry Matsuda, he completed his mission. The FBI held a quiet commendation ceremony in which he received recognition for one of the most successful long-term undercover operations in the Bureau's history. At 72, he officially retired, returning to his family in San Francisco, a wife of 40 years, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren who'd spent 3 years believing he was consulting for the Justice Department overseas. But the story didn't end there. 6 months after Marcus's transfer, he received a letter at ADX Florence. The return address was San Francisco, California. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message written in neat, precise handwriting. Dear Mr. Davidson, I've spent my career teaching young agents that true strength isn't measured by how much fear you inspire, but by how much discipline you maintain. You ruled through intimidation and violence, believing silence was weakness. I ruled through patience and observation, understanding that silence is often the loudest statement you can make. In your world, you were a king. In mine, you were always just a case file waiting to be closed. I hope your new accommodations provide time for reflection. Respectfully, Special Agent Henry Matsuda, retired. Marcus read the letter 3 times in his isolation cell. Then he did something he hadn't done since childhood. He wept, not from fear or sadness, but from the crushing realization that everything he'd built, every ounce of power he'd accumulated, had been undone by a quiet old man he'd mistaken for prey. In the visitor log at ADX Florence, a notation appeared beside Marcus Davidson's name. Inmate has requested enrollment in the prison's education program, specifically anger management and conflict resolution courses. Parole board review recommended after completion. It wasn't redemption. Not yet, but it was a beginning. Back in San Francisco, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Henry Matsuda sat in his backyard surrounded by his grandchildren. The youngest, a curious 5-year-old named Emma, climbed onto his lap and asked the question that children often ask without understanding its weight. Grandpa, what did you do at work before you retired? Henry smiled, the same gentle smile he'd worn through 3 years of silence, harassment, and carefully controlled fear. He looked at his wife across the patio, who raised an eyebrow with an expression that said, "This should be good." "Well, sweetheart," Henry said softly, "I taught people about the power of patience. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the one listening most carefully. And sometimes the people who seem weak are really just waiting for the right moment to be strong." Emma considered this with the serious contemplation only children can muster. Like a superhero with a secret identity, Henry laughed, a genuine, warm sound that his family had missed desperately during his years undercover. Exactly like that. Except instead of cape, I wore an orange jumpsuit. And instead of flying, I mostly just sat very, very still. His oldest son, Michael, who'd been listening from the grill, shook his head with admiration and slight disbelief. "Dad, 3 years of being harassed daily by violent criminals, and you never broke cover." "Not once." "How did you do it?" Henry looked out at his garden, at the carefully tended plants, at the life he'd returned to after 3 years in hell. "Martial arts training taught me that strength without discipline is just violence. FBI training taught me that observation without ego is the most powerful weapon you can carry. Prison taught me that the people who shout loudest are usually the ones most afraid of silence." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Plus, knowing that every insult, every threat, every moment of harassment was being recorded and would eventually put dangerous people away for additional decades. That made it surprisingly easy to stay quiet." His wife, Margaret, brought over a tray of lemonade. "I still can't believe they let you do it at 70 years old. They needed someone who looked vulnerable, someone the inmates would underestimate." Henry accepted a glass with a grateful nod. Turns out, being an elderly Asian man with decades of martial arts discipline and FBI experience makes you the perfect undercover agent for a maximum security prison. Who would ever suspect Grandpa? Michael laughed. Marcus Davidson certainly didn't. "No," Henry agreed, his expression growing thoughtful. He saw what he expected to see, a weak old man who could be dominated. He never considered that weakness might be a disguise, that silence might be a strategy, that the person you're bullying might actually be the one in control the entire time. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Did you ever get scared, Grandpa?" Henry picked her up gently and settled her on his knee. "Every single day, sweetheart. But being brave doesn't mean not feeling afraid. It means feeling afraid and doing what's right anyway. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. Even when you can't tell the people you love what you're really doing." The family fell quiet for a moment, contemplating the weight of that sacrifice. 3 years. 3 years of maintaining a cover so deep that even his own children hadn't known the full truth. 3 years of enduring humiliation, threats, and violence, all while gathering evidence that would dismantle one of the most corrupt prison operations in the state. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "So what's next for the legendary Special Agent Matsuda? More undercover work? Consulting? Writing a book?" Henry smiled and closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The same meditative breathing he'd practiced for 3 years in that prison yard while Marcus Davidson hurled insults at his back. "Next," he said, opening his eyes with a mischievous glint. "Next, I'm going to do something truly radical. I'm going to be loud. I'm going to talk constantly. I'm going to make up for 3 years of silence by never shutting up." The family erupted in laughter. And somewhere in Colorado, in a cell measuring 7 by 12 feet, Marcus Reaper Davidson sat in the silence he'd once dismissed as weakness, finally understanding that the quietest person in the room had been the most dangerous all along. Have you ever underestimated someone because of their appearance or demeanor, only to discover you had completely misjudged their strength, intelligence, or capabilities? What did that experience teach you about the danger of assumptions? If this story reminded you that true power often comes wrapped in quiet dignity rather than loud intimidation, show some love with a like. Drop a comment sharing a time when you or someone you know prove that silence can be strategic and that patience is its own form of strength. And don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Wonder for more stories that prove karma has perfect timing and justice sometimes, whereas the most unexpected disguises. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the next time you encounter someone who seems meek or quiet, consider the possibility that they're not weak. They're just waiting. See you in the next video.